Aloha. So I just want to clear some things up from the last video. Not really clear things up, but just clarify and take a step even further into the perspective of the macro storylines being wrapped up in personal relationships. So we have leaders who represent people. You had an entire government agency that was designed to take out your Black Panther leaders and so on and so forth. Any kind of leaders. Obviously, you can go into whatever with the Black Panthers and all this other stuff, but besides the point, there are government agencies that are vested in keeping leaders from growing out of your system, out of your community. YouTube is doing this right now. It focuses all of your attention on busy mind control work. And before I forget, one thing that I wanted to add to this whole discussion is the sense of justice that is tied up in the relationship discussion and the revolution discussion. So there is a certain, like the original people of this land and any land that has been colonized, those original people, their history, their truth, their justice is anything towards that happening is a hindrance towards the Western Empire, and everything within the Western Empire is vested on sucking the life out of that so-called old world without being recognized for doing that, with instead being recognized for being like the superheroes of the universe. So this is why you have all these movies, and this is why I said this is the atmosphere behind why things are the way they are. Why things are the way they are in reference to like society keeping one focus on a particular race above everybody else, and how you can see the system of racism, white supremacy is alive and well, even more so today because people are not talking about it. Back in the day when they were like lynching people, at least it was known that like, you know, what was going on. So people are just being lynched in different ways. And it's a more complex version of mind control and control overall. So this is why things have to be equally bad as they seem to get better in this so-called Western society, because people can't really taste, if you allow people to taste any kind of like true like essence of life, they'll want to strive for something beyond what is spoon-fed to them by this system that requires their enslavement and the enslavement of their future generations. So that's why I said that people throw around this conversation. That's why I talk about the truther community so much. They throw around this whole discussion like New World Order and the so-called powers that be, but it's like a game to them. Like they're not really acknowledging all the parts of that. It's become become a thing, a meme. That's what it's become, a meme. So the same thing, okay, like the discussion, like the depths, like I've talked about in previous videos in reference to what the civil rights movement was, in reference to what it needed to be. It needed to address at least the psychological implications of all of racism and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it didn't. It put a concession out there on the television for people to buy and accept and chew on for about 50 years until they realized there was nothing in it for them anyway. And then, try something new to chew on. So the new thing to chew on is this swirling, or not swirling, this new age agenda thing that includes like swirling and the vegan agenda, like all of these like so-called positive, uplifting, what they're trying to pawn off as spiritual ideas of an individual. So they're also doing this in Hollywood, in social media with their up and coming artists and everything. They're making them more real. It's like they're, because these individuals are picked and chosen. Like, it's not the most talented people that are out there, doing everything. It's the ones that, are speaking the right language. And largely, a lot of the times, not largely, but all of the times that are included in that world are to accept and speak only the language of the system of RWS and everything that helps maintain that system. And that's just like to represent a whole subcategory of control and authority on all of the physical, psychological, and spiritual levels of an individual. They're going down even into their whole timelines, their generations, their like who and what we are on every level means something. So like the new age basically saying like, race and all this other stuff doesn't matter. It's fucking lazy. That's what it really is. It's just lazy. And just take it a step even further. Well, it's obviously lazy. Take even a step even further to put an intelligence behind it, or not even an intelligence. This is a basic observation, an observation of the majority of people. There's a lot of people. The majority of people out here in the world, the people who are struggling and that whole world mentality. There's a lot of, so everything exists psychologically and spiritually first. So there's a lot of, before it comes into the physical. So there's a lot of things that are existing on the spiritual and physical realms within each individual that are not really being addressed and not even being acknowledged as existing on a micro scale, let alone a macro scale. So like that goes into like a lot of these storylines not even being acknowledged on a macro scale, even in entire relationships. You got entire relationships, families and all kinds of stuff, still being okay with teaching their family, have entire relationships built on teaching their family the slave story. And then, not even being at all aware of the information connected to genetics, as far as genetics being tied into the storyline connected to white genetic annihilation, the system of racism, white supremacy, designing an entire culture to protect itself. Insert in abortions, clinics in the inner cities. Maintaining numbers, control, time, the entire Hollywood industry and social media / social media industry now being designed to suck and suck your time and suck your consciousness through sucking your time. So they install all of these, what are they called? These filler people, these carbon copy filler people that represent a certain stream of consciousness, a certain stream of change or evolution. So like, you can see a lot of the celebrities that they're pushing. So on these new social media streams, like that Hot Wings challenge, that Hot Wings show, whatever it is, they pick certain people. So I saw this Billie Eilish girl that's on there, or young woman who's on there, or so there's a character representation of comfort in society, which is like that blissful ignorance that is talented at the same time. So it's like the talent or the distraction, that's what it is. The distraction is so vibrant that the storyline, the macro storyline doesn't even matter. So what the system has been doing it's just been pumping so-called talented people who represent a consciousness to the culture. Now slow it down. You can see each time somebody being thrown at you, like a new person, they just keep pumping out these new, like I said, these new people that represent an interaction. They're humanizing the system. Like I was saying, the civil rights movement was designed to humanize the system of racism, white supremacy around the world, so it can set the standard or set the foundation for now playing to the rest of the world that it is the freedom fighters or the liberators of the entire world. So these storylines exist on the macro, so they're like books. This is what it is, on a level that people, to make it more personal for people in reference to the relationships, because I think that's a very effective way to explain a lot of this stuff, is to explain it through relationships. So in reference to like swirling, before I get on to that, before I get to that, it's because it's like a library out, and so I don't forget it in some kind of way. Let me look at a book or something. Like a library, existing in the relationship. Okay, so shit, now I forgot the other part. I was gonna try to remember. It was about the swirling. So like words, like human, like what is that? And people pride themselves in how, human they are. I mean, it's become a joke. It's kind of like the joke, the human thing is kind of like a joke, just like when I used to say, before I was even aware of any flat earth stuff, I was like, oh yeah. It's like people who think in flat earth, using it as an example of, people were just on a different world, a different realm. So human is kind of like that, as far as we used it, like I used it to thinking it's for the benefit, but it ended up being a deeper storyline. So like human becomes a limitation after a while, because you can also see how it's used as a weapon. So there's more than one side to a lot of these words. A lot of these words have multi-meanings, and when they're repeated and there's a theme, there's a whole, so just like in the theme of, so-called white people in society, there's this human theme in society, and that's, you know, stamped into your reality with the whole aliens and Sasquatch and monkey evolution and dinosaurs, and it's a whole culture. This is why I said this is so important, why it's involved in people's relationships. So that whole culture, it's a deep discussion. Like, so this is a consciousness. So that's a whole consciousness. So when the what is it called? The like the magic of words, so that when that gets reduced down to, so when something as complex as all of those discussions involving relationships, individual relationships on a micro level reflecting a macro level and vice versa, when that gets simplified down to a term like swirling, you can see that's designed for a particular level of limitation of consciousness. Let's control these people at this level. Keep the discussion right here. Make a meme, package it up real quick, and throw it right out there. And they throw that meme out there, and people are like, "Bow! Oh, I got it." So that's what these hashtags are for. They're like, "Oh shit, yeah, this one will put a whole bunch of stuff out there." So people are experiencing this this like parasitic meme. That's basically what it is. So this parasitic meme, it shuts down parts of every layer of you. Oh yeah, it shuts down every, like in some kind of way. You can see like colors, or see it like light. See yourself as like lights, and it's something just going in and just like turning off all these switches, like switch. Ah, fuck you, switch. So just imagine that being like a library in each individual, and you never even get to read it. You never even allow yourself to read it because society told you it's a non-issue, it's not even important. So there's entire libraries of discussion and unveiling of the self on a micro and a macro scale that we haven't even been allowed to investigate or discuss individually or collectively because of these limitations and these blocks that are just accepted in society down to the very nature of our relationships. So back to that whole library thing, imagine it like being like a library. Imagine your library existing, and then it's dark. You haven't been in there. You don't know what's in there. Basically, it's kind of like you don't know who you are. And then the other person has the same thing, and then you guys just, you know, say, all right, well, let's just try this out because love. And we're just like, oh, what's love? Oh, it's this thing. Don't you watch movies? It's got all this stuff. It's like tight, man. Like love is raw as fuck. Yeah, it's like what the fuck? So it's like kind of like humans. Like human, oh man, humans are tight as fuck, man. That shit is raw. And then like dolphins and whales, Pleiadians, all tight as fuck. So it's this childish fucking game that that's being played. Check out AM1. It's on their shirts. All street, all heart, all hustle. Can you see it? You can probably can't see. I need a light on there. Anyway, let's see. Yeah, so one of his hashtags is the mainstream media, and the mainstream media. What is it? is not your friend. So that whole thing, the culture of the mainstream media is, it's like our best friend. It's not even our best friend. It's like our teacher. It's our comfort food. It's our psychological comfort. It's like our societal comfort food. That's what the mainstream media is. Societal comfort food. And we're just these obese, you know, severely obese on every, you know, like consciously, spiritually, psychologically obese with this nonsense. And that obese, that nonsense is that library. That library is filled with shit. So all the baggage, all the hoarding. So this is what happens. That library is turned off, right? But that library still exists. And that library is a place to store things. So what happens is, since you're not utilizing the energy in that library, that space needs to be used for something. So what happens is, people gather all this shit that they're hoarding within the side effects of society, and they store it in that now storage facility that was a library. That library is for you designed. Like the library of you, in whatever kind of way, for whatever kind of reason, in some kind of way. And you don't even have to like take it or leave it, like obviously, but like you are a library. There's how much information is within just your own family storyline, like what's going on with okay, so going back to the original storyline, or the original discussion of like justice being intertwined within just truth. And that's why a truther community was invented, because true, like depths of truth involves justice, like in that same moment. So the words you speak, if you're speaking like a truth that is coming from like the truth of the land, like the truth of the people, like the tree people, the land, the air, the waters, and all this other stuff, if it's coming from that kind of truth, then yeah, it doesn't need to be wrapped up and dressed in like a whole like new age costume with Oprah's, you know, super soul Avengers to come to avenge the world. That's what's being sold to people. These it's this truth that is it's not even worth talking about it, because I'm again realizing that this information is for people who really don't even qualify. They don't even like acknowledge the shit that's being talked about in these videos. It's like they don't even so I don't want to direct the information towards them. I want to shift the information towards another demographic, because fuck those people right now. It ain't worth even spending a moment of time even trying to over explain that information for them who don't even have the capacity to entertain like shit, like the baseline stuff that you're bringing up. So going back to the swirling, and one could argue that all this stuff is that, you know, whatever, but there's a certain level of dial, and I don't like, you know, veering too far into that layer of giving a fuck about like what the truther community is talking about, all that stuff, because it doesn't need to be labeled. It'll be inherently, like, the depths of truth will involve, it will be inherently just. So there's no justice in the debate, you know, truth of flat earth, because the debate truth within the flat earth community is tied up within the egos of the individuals. With the networking that has already been done, they've already had multiple conventions for just even flat earth. Just with that, they could have already brought so many things to the discussion table that would make flat earth be, you know, it would have so much more meaning. Like, and it would make it so it wouldn't be able to be downplayed, because it's not about what they're, you know, saying it is. So that's why I was saying, like, before, like, a lot of this, you know, these channels have been put out there on purpose because they were designed to, you know, be, you know, this dopey demographic to control, like, a thought, like a macro thought, like a faint distant leader, a leaderless movement, like that whole stuff, that whole thing right there. That's to even have that discussion of leaders and a movement means that there's leaders in the movement. So that whole discussion of a leader, that whole meme of a leaderless movement is another thing, another control measure. So beyond that, let's shift gears back into that. So control measure is a good control measure of, like, using words to control people. So like I was saying before, swirling, yeah, you can talk about that. You can talk about how that's that one subject. It's not to downplay that subject. You can talk about that one subject, but just kind of like flat earth, let's talk about all the macro, how that ties into the macro. Because if you're just talking about, you know, swirling, then you might as well just be, you know, talking whatever, like in talking some old bullshit, just, you know, shooting the shit. That's what I mean by like inherently just, like activated truth to where it's like, all right, well, yeah, the earth is flat, but who the fuck lied about the earth being round in the first place? Like that requires justice in the question. See, that question was basically deemed like not, that was deemed not worthy of a discussion point by the so-called leaders. And that's why I was saying, like, that's a little fishy, man. Like, that should be at the, for me and all my friends and family and all that other shit, like, that would be the first question. And my question is not even, like, our question is not even, you know, you say that it's distracting from what flat earth actually means. Like, that was the beginning of me observing this whole flat earth community. That was like 3 years ago. I was like, what? Like, wait a second. I am very aware, and many other people are very aware of how this directly relates to like the biggest thing that's going on right now is the lie itself, But so if we're talking about the lie itself and all that's, connected to lying to the consciousness of the people itself, that's distracting away from what? It's like going deeper into the discussion is distracting away from the discussion. So another thing with distracting, like when somebody says that, they're telling you, we're talking to a particular demographic. We're talking to a particular group of people, like a Disneyland group of, thinkers. They just want to think on this whole like cartoon version of what things are, because cartoon versions of what things are easily controllable. They can just control, that's why, people like Mark and Patricia were saying, keep flat earth on the topic. And like, well, first of all, who the fuck are you to say what, flat earth should be and what are the topics? Like who, but they've said that multiple times. That was my whole discussion about it. I was like, wait a second. And then that's where it stopped. Like the discussion's never even made. So that's where they have this entitled sort of authority, not sort of entitled authority that's tied up in the racism, white supremacy, that's tied into a justice that threatens a privilege. So our justices that we are unveiling in society is threatening the privilege of the people who have profited from our justices being infringed upon. So their privileges, and you can see it mathematically, their privileges, like our justice means less privilege for them. So when you have any truther community, you have to keep that community away from speaking about terms and discussion points that involve a justice or a fire that wakens inside of individuals. See, what Flat Earth does is Flat Earth awakens it opens the eyes to what that fire could be. But what happens is that people, get distracted by all the YouTube channels and their limitations and how they've interpreted Flat Earth. And then that's it. It just dies out because it automatically becomes a thing. It's kind of like, what is that thing? Something like... something so beautiful you don't even want to touch it. You don't even want to like look at it. You just leave it alone. So yeah. There's no real accountability for this lack of discussion. There's no discussion circles for this discussion. And how I see it, it's like the cancer itself is the psychology that created it. The intelligence behind the psychology of heliocentrism involves other control measures on a massive scale. Mathematically, you can see how all of this information that is designed to distract you with shit like NASA and all that, cartoons and all that other stuff. You can see that the same way with system of racism, white supremacy, and why so-called white people have to be celebrated so much in Hollywood. They have to be sold to you. White people are the what is that? White people are the mascot for Western so-called civilization. And they get something back for being that mascot. They have to speak all those languages, and they have to speak the system of racism, white supremacy language, and then they get a little something back from it. So you have indigenous people who are speaking that language also to get something back from that world. And that's what, the control grids of Hollywood and social media are doing right now. Which time do I have? They're doing this right now on a massive scale, on a macro scale, and a micro scale. So these control measures are running, and even in your truther community, these discussions aren't being had. That truth is off limits truth. Which is another testament to, if that's the right word, to how that truther community is so commercialized and based upon the mainstream media because it's reactionary. It only will sell, like the flat earthers will only sell what's receivable by like a childish sort of mainstream mind. The same way the truther community is always reacting to what's happening in the mainstream media. It's not empowered. It's not self-empowered. It has the illusion of self-empowerment by having all these other not self-empowered outside of people. Like, it's kind of like it's going like you have the Democrats and the Republicans, and then you have like these other parties. So that's what it is. Like these other parties are there, so they seem like they're powerful, like progressives, like Bernie Sanders or Democratic Socialists or whatever, Green parties and all that other stuff. Like they seem like they sound a little different than these regular politicians, but they're still trapped in that system of racism, white supremacy, etc., colonization, that whole Western civilization concept. So you can see how there are these layers of languages or consciousness that affect relationships. So these relationships are being controlled, like I just explained there, on a macro scale down to the micro scale with words like swirling, and swirling just being like, oh, just to throw it out there the same way. Like you don't discuss anything further on a macro scale beyond the story of human. Now see human as see the word human as the same kind of weaponized, like see the same portrait of a weaponized version of the word human, the same way the globe was weaponized. It's like see it from that perspective, and then you'll see like how the new age, where the new age is coming from. So like I was saying, it's jumping off of this whole idea, this false identity of the peacekeepers and the freedom fighters of the world. That's what the new age program is jumping off of, and it's going to use the United Nations and what I'm saying, the flat earth so-called movement or realization or awakening, to sell in this old version of politics and security and governments, and this new version of governments the same way they do it in Hollywood movies. They always say it's like, oh yeah, it's like there's good guys in the offices, so just let the good guys in the offices just fix the story. Meanwhile, they're just stealing time and controlling and setting up the system for the next control grid. So, and you can't really have those discussions because you're like you're like the topics that you're talking about are not even they're not accepted as being valid. Like they're not a part of what revolution is. They're not a part of what forward thinking is. That's what the flat earth community did to people who are talking about how flat earth or the heliocentric, the lie itself is the biggest issue. at least for starters. And then when you say, no, the lie is off limits, that's not talking about what flat earth is about. Talking about the science of flat earth is how we should talk about flat earth. Right, yeah. And then everybody's like, yeah. And then here we are 3 years later, and then everybody's still talking that same shit. And then never even go into the lie because they believe the original lie. The original lie that Mark Sargent told everybody, which was, oh yeah, just keep the story on the science. And they're like, all right, how long you gonna say that? That's their storyline. That's what they're gonna do anyway. So, swirling, word magic. Yeah, so that's the thing. So swirling goes into like spiritual relationships. Like, what you can still talk about swirling if you're talking about it, like if you had a classroom full of high schoolers or college kids. It doesn't even matter. Let's say college kids. You just had a whole room full of college kids, and you asked them. You had the option to ask them, have two discussions. One discussion would be, let's talk about swirling. And then the second discussion is, let's talk about what it means to have a spiritual relationship with yourself and how that relationship affects your relationship with your partner or your loved one. So that's what I'm saying in reference to what the word magic does to these whole internet communities that people hit up the internet and start tapping away. I guess they type like people typing away on the internet about like swirling now because it's a meme that has been put out there. So this is how you can control whole people. Whole people are being controlled by word magic because there's no critical thought involved. It's just looking at this thing that's just pumping energy and some kind of energetic information into your world, and you're cashing it in with the time. It's like the time over time. When as a whole we could be critically thinking on this massive scale that moves so not that it's about time like quick, but it is something about efficiency. There's a depth in love and relationships that is very efficient. When you're aware of your loved one, that's an efficient version of what they call love, because like when you explain the details of what love really is, you actually get more close to what love really is. Instead of just limiting your relationship to like the word magic of the word itself. Like, I love you. You see that like it's like, I love you. It's just nothing there. So that's basically what society has done to the chambers, the inside of us, and involving relationships around in and around us. The society has done with those chambers is it's filled those chambers inside of us. It's just pumped like this sludge tank. It just pumped it right in your system. It's like pumping this shit called love into your world with the music industry and movies, and then they're just fucking pumping, just pumping that shit into your reality, and by the end of the day you're just like, so that's why I was mentioning like Billie Eilish and all these other just up and coming people that they just take out of these cloning centers or fucking just like reproductive farms for people who would just speak the language of slave minds and bullshit. it's a whole culture that, you know, people are having babies in and raising their whole babies, raising these rabies babies, to maintain, you know, like a whole macro storyline. I'm pretty sure I broke down what I wanted to break down in reference to the justice. That was the main thing. That was the main thing that I wanted to add on to the last video. Because it's not about the relationships. Like I said, this video, like like swirling is not about swirling. It's about, you know, what we're missing out on when we don't talk about, you know, what's behind that. You know, when you turn it into don't speak that language, convert it into a more critically thinking type of language that involves piecing it together by including the macro storyline at least. But like that, and then let's go back to Flat Earth again, where I was talking about how that makes things a little suspect in reference to like how that part of the discussion wasn't even allowed. Like when you would bring up, like when I would bring up these topics to discuss in chat rooms on well-known Flat Earth channels, you would get timed out or blocked and all kinds of stuff. Like, what the fuck? Like, you can't even talk about the liars. You can talk about the lie, but don't talk about the liars. You know, like, what? Don't talk about the lies, the liars. And even when you talk about the lies, only talk about the scientific version of the lies. Don't be distracting people with all the how this involves the people's cosmology and the peoples who have been also disqualified for being intellectually, you know, connected to this reality. They've been primitive and savage by this university system that they had to step on them to put them up there. You can't talk about those people because that's not scientific. Don't talk about that. Like, and then it's another thing. Science is the biggest weapon of that world, and it's not even that strong. It's not at all. Like, that's not where, you know, your strength would be. So it's not where that strength is. That's why I'm saying, like, this strength of that, so the next moves are not going to be involving like science and technology and all that other stuff. It's going to shift gears, evolve into a so-called spiritual interpretation of mind control. Whereas before it was just like technology and cartoons could control people, but now it start getting a little more in the realms of, you know, controlling people, deeper layers of control. So where are we at? Yeah, the justice. So this is what I'm saying is why Flat Earth and truther communities can't talk about race or anything involving the system of racism, white supremacy, is because the Flat Earth, the so-called truther community, and the New Age community are mostly inundated with so-called white people who still affiliate with that terminology, whatever that is. That's a block in itself too. So their privilege to call themselves white in a so-called white world, white consciousness, is threatened when you speak about not being black. Because when you're talking about not being black and being indigenous and being like connected to the land and the culture and the ancestors and all this other stuff, you're talking about what threatens the privilege that allows them to dictate what you should be talking about. Let me say that again. When you talk about what empowers you and you talk about who and what you are throughout and on every level, not skipping anything, because the New Age skips. This is why the New Age skips over the essence of who and what you are in the physical realm and all this other stuff and the storylines that, you know, predate all this other nonsense that's been going up to date up until now. I almost lost my train of thought. I think I kind of did. So yeah, you connecting with all those roots and those like very empowering and you know, fulfilling in many different ways. When you connect to all that strength and that fire and that will and that leadership ability and that essence of those relationships, when you connect into that shit, you are connecting to a power that they don't have. And you're connecting to that power that they don't have on land that they claim to have ownership over on one realm. That's connected in the privilege storyline too, because these are discussions that are not being had, and I'm giving examples of why they're not being had. From using an example of the flat Earth community and the so-called truther community and the New Age community as examples of this shit. It's clear as day. And so yeah, like I said, the reasons why. So you connecting to that is empowering yourself, adding your fire to your world, is going to affect their fire in their world. And the imploding of the fire in their world means a losing of the privileges and benefits and the authority and the control and the dominance and the creature comforts and all that other shit that comes along with it too. They lose all that shit. So in the truther community, they have to distract you with all these other shits like, it's only about, Tartaria and mud floods and no forest on flat earth and flat earth and chemtrails and CERN and all this other stuff. The pieces of the puzzle. So you're distracted by all that stuff. Is that not important? Of course not. It's all part of the story, but the bigger storyline is like how all these pieces fit together. And we won't be able to piece these things together if we have our own internal blocks tied up in depths of truth. So your depth of truth coming at this storyline from this angle over here, it's threatening. It's threatening to a whole mass of people. So what happens is, in the New Age community and the Truther community, they focus on all these, pieces of the puzzle and then say, we're united on, how all these pieces fit together. But they won't talk about how all these pieces fit together outside of what they're comfortable with talking about. So they'll just abstractly talk about how we're all connected and united, vegans and New Agers and flat earth and all this other shit, conscious community, or we're all the same, right? It's that simple. So we have that discussion without having that discussion. And then the discussions that need to be made from not having that discussion start to fester inside the individuals and on the macro scale. And this is why I'm saying it's so important to talk about this, because we're missing out. By not talking about this stuff, we're missing out on opportunities to move through time and through this experience, like healing and moving things, making big moves. We're missing out on a lot of this stuff because a lot of people are still limiting themselves by the creature comforts psychologically and consciously of the people who are still limited to the system of racism, white supremacy. The same way white people, so-called people who affiliate with that term and call themselves white, are still tied up into the system of racism, white supremacy, when you can clearly see clear as day, like the government is not going to share like a superhero, like Native American superheroes. They're not going to put, like empowering information about like the truth of what happened, what the government did to the original people. They're not going to talk about that. They're going to talk about how they're great in their own way and how, they were justified in doing what they were doing against your people. So they're justified in doing what they were doing against your people because, and then the other people fill in the blanks and don't you have a computer? Don't you have this? Don't you have that? And then that's how these discussions don't get made. So the same way you're distracted in the truther community, when they go about it in that way, talking about all these other symptoms to the cancer, what's not happening or the same way that happens in the truther community, this also happens in the mainstream media. You're distracted by ice cream, hot dogs, hamburgers, sex programming, social media, bright colors. Just look at your commercials. Blah, 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 blah. Like fear, medical problems, sickness, disease. They're feeding you the prescription drugs, and they're feeding you the poison at the same time, and then saying you're doing this to yourself. Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself. And then at the end of the day, you're just like, oh, did you beat yourself to death? Did you hit yourself to death? And then you're like, nah, I think I did a good job. You're like, yeah, the American dream, we did a good job. We didn't hit ourselves to death, but we gave ourselves a good knocking in the, So it's that whole that whole sadistic thing that's accepted in the definition, going back to the definition of human, which goes back into the definition of like the animals, the monkey evolution, that whole like, oh yeah, we're all animals, so this is accepted in society, this is how things are supposed to be, this is normal. It's normal for society to be doing the way things that it's doing because we're just evolving from monkeys. What's the difference between bombing all these countries and monkeys going from one clan to another clan and beating up other monkeys? It's the same thing, right? That's what they're selling to the whole world. So that's the shit that I'm talking about. That's just like, what? Like, why are we not talking about how that is just completely absurd? That's an obvious truth. Like, the things what's happening is the truther community is too, it's too vested, it's too tied up into the system, and which limits its imagination and its depths of going to the truth, because the real truth exists just on like the surface. Like, it doesn't, you don't have to go to it doesn't have to be super complex. Explain how a lot of this stuff existing, how the fucked up stuff, that's all, you got to make all these videos and do all these fancy images and all this other stuff. No, just tell it like it is, like what's going on, how that very far and out there thing connects to this very simple and observable thing, like right here on the street level. So let me get back to what I was saying before. Justice, privilege. Your justice is a threat to their privilege. Your truth is a threat to the power that comes from their mistruths, the empire that has thrived under their mistruths. And those mistruths are based upon the truth that you created, like the original observations of this relationship that we have in this realm. So they're selling you back your own truths wrapped in their own version of the truth, which is a mistruth, which all these mainstream religions, all this other bullshit. And then saying they invented everything because their God was created like, a few days ago, and then, that's who we should follow. So you just, jump on board. Oh, this is a cool, good, and they got a new book. It says new on it. The old one's old. Then why are you looking at this one? Because it's new. So, you went from the Old Testament to the New Testament. You went from the old world to the new world. You went from the old age to the new age. And you went from the old world, like to the old world order to the new world order. It's the same shit. And people are just going to keep following, you know, keep thinking on that level. And that's why I said that's one group of people that, you know, they're going to do that. That they've been doing that forever. We were like individuals were doing that in our own way. We have to go through a certain process. But right now, you know, I think there's enough people who are out there who are like, nah, let's start having these discussions that are going into what's beyond the reactionary bullshit, with like the truth beyond the hashtag truth. This ain't no hashtag truth shit. So yeah, hashtag truth is a weapon used to keep the people from diving into the organic truth of the self. I'm like using that word, but like the depths of the truth, the deeper truths of the self that go into empowering the self. And those truths are kept from people, like I said, because the people behind the deceptions in the first place, they will lose a part of their privilege on a massive scale, on a micro scale and a macro scale. Look at the privilege that so-called white people have just on the internet. Look at your trending page. It's no different than your commercials on Fox News. Disney owns Fox News. I mean, there's no difference in it. They've always been the same group. They've only had the appearance of being different. So when people are ready to have that discussion, that's when you're really going to get into some change worth really speaking about. Because right now, as people are talking about the word change, like the word love, like relationships that are based upon the word love. Well, people are talking about relationships or revolution based upon the word revolution. They ain't really talking about like the intricacies, the complexities of revolution. And they're really talking about learning from previous revolutions and the depths that we have to go into, like internal revolutions that need to occur before you even start talking about the macro scale. So we're not even allowing ourselves to go there largely because a lot of the times because like I said, we got so much work to do individually. People are so broken in so many different ways individually that the attractiveness of linear truth, the grips of that really just don't, you know, people are just like flying to that like moths to a flame. They're just like, oh yeah. So or like part that like the essence, there's like something that gets lost there. I think I'm done with this video. I'm like exhausted. Yeah.